We're going both nostalgic and new for Thanksgiving this year with a chocolate crust pumpkin pie. It has all the elements of a cozy pumpkin pie that you want, with a slight twist of a chocolate crust and chocolate drizzle on top. So it gives you everything you want with something a little extra that really turns you into a happy person. Let's make it together. Pumpkin is either one of those that you look forward to every year, or maybe you don't love it, and maybe this is the reason you're gonna start loving it, which is a chocolate crust. Chocolate and pumpkin go really well together, and it just slightly elevates it with this extra flavor that's both gonna be in the crust and a little bit on top of the pumpkin filling, which to me is really special. And it's just a great way to kind of change it up if you're wanting a classic, but just to slightly turn up the volume a little bit. So we're gonna start with this all-purpose flour still. And that's the key here, is we need to get the right ratio when we're making a crust. Now, my goal is to always make you feel confident in making a pie crust, because once you start making them, can I just tell you, it is always gonna be something you can do. It's like riding a bike, and it's always just so much more delicious if you can make it at home. Promise you will at least try it, because it's worth it. Now with that flour, I'm gonna cut it with some good cocoa powder, because that's what's actually going to create more of a chocolate crust, as you can imagine. We need just a small amount of sugar. It just helps sweeten it slightly. We don't want it to be super sweet, just a little bit, and of course a little bit of salt to season it. Now that I of course just mixed around to make sure the cocoa is evenly mixed in, that there are no major lumps in it. And you can see, look how simple that is. That is the dry ingredients. And now we're just gonna chop up the butter, because you want cold butter. So this is from the fridge cold. And I'm doing an all butter crust. Now I have gone back and forth in my life where I will do some lard. I don't really like shortening because it has no flavor, but some lard that acts as a shortening cut with butter. But honestly, when you do all butter, I do think the flavor is superior. And I think the flakiness, if you know how to work it in correctly and form your dough, is gonna be just as good. So I'm gonna put my butter right in here. See how I cut it in small pieces? And then I use my hands. Do you know why? They are your best tool in the kitchen, and this is what's gonna work really well. I first like to toss all these pieces of butter, break them up if they're stuck together, toss them in this dry mixture. That way they're just each individual pieces and they're not all stuck together. And then start picking them up one by one with your thumb and forefinger and just squeezing it. See how I squeeze and let go? And keep doing that. And what you're slowly doing is working it into the dry mixture until you have irregular pieces, like a really coarse wet sand. And you want to see those little pieces of butter that are irregular size, maybe the size of a pea or smaller. But honestly, don't get worried about this. Just try it. Once you do, it's a really fun process. So with this now, we're gonna add our liquid. I'm gonna add a little bit of vanilla extract. Usually that does not go into a dough, but vanilla and chocolate work to help each other bring out the best chocolate flavor, and that's really what we want. And then we're gonna start adding our water. So you will always see on a pie crust recipe usually like 4 to 6 tablespoons of water or whatever it is, and start with that smaller amount, because did you know the time of year, the humidity in the air, whatever it is, that can all affect how the dough gets hydrated. So you wanna make sure you don't over add, but what we're gonna do is just toss that water in, and yes, my hands will still get messy, and you can see instantly we're starting to get a different looking dough. It's becoming something that holds together better, and what I wanna do is just work it enough to see if it will actually create a dough or if I wanna add a little bit more water. I don't think this is a good time to think, oh, I don't wanna add water because that's really bad, I hear, for dough. You can't add too much water, but you can also add too little water. So don't be scared. But the reason we add the vanilla with this too is because the vanilla counts as the liquid. So this is now the perfect mixture. It's starting to clump. It holds together really well, as you can see. And now what I can do is kind of just form it into a ball slightly. See how that works? That's perfect. And just bring up some plastic wrap, which I had ready to go. And usually I'll use a reusable, but I wanted you to always be able to see what I'm doing. And what we're gonna do is just put all this right into plastic. I washed my hands just so I could show you better. To form this, you just want to bring up the sides of the plastic. This is how I always do it usually, just so you don't overwork it. And you see how it just presses into a beautiful dough. And yes, you're gonna see pieces of butter. Don't let that scare you. When that actually bakes then in the oven later after we roll it out, that's gonna create pockets of flakiness. It's a win-win, right? So what I'm doing is just forming it perfectly into a kind of a disc. I said perfectly, but it's not perfect. And don't worry if it doesn't look perfect, it doesn't need to. I'm bringing it over on itself. I have that perfect looking disc. I said perfect again. You know, it's not, let me just tell you something. Sometimes we overuse words when we make something about the kitchen, but the thing is, there is no perfect. The important part is doing. And now you can see it's a disc. I'm gonna put this in the fridge just to make sure that butter stays cold before we roll it out. This has been chilling, which is just important to keep that butter cold. And I'm gonna flip my wood board over because I like to roll out on here. And just in case I have anything lingering aromas, I like to flip it over on a side I don't usually use and make sure to flour it. Now, yes, you can over flour, but the thing is, you need flour so it doesn't stick. So don't feel bad about using that flour. And then open up your disc of dough. Is this not exciting? I think a chocolate crust is exciting because it's something special. And you know what's great about this? In this crust form, you could have this in the freezer and you could have it ready to go, you know, over a month before something if you wanted to. It really wouldn't matter. So now what I'm gonna do is just do short rolls and be turning it the whole time. See how I just keep it turning? What that does is it keeps it moving. And when you have a dough or a crust that is moving, it's gonna stick less to something and it's gonna stay in a circle more. So do you see how I just give it a nice kind of quarter or eighth of a turn every time I'm rolling? That's exactly what I want. And if you want, you can every so often flip it over even. Don't feel bad doing that, just to make sure it's kind of going even until you get to your circle to go into the pie dish. I have it just about rolled out. Now I do like to check the sizing because this is what makes sure you have a nice crust. So I like to get it right to my 14 inches, which is what I use for a 9-inch. And this has a nice flat edge. I usually like a glass or ceramic one just so they bake evenly for me. I have used a metal one, those can work, but I like to make sure it has a rim because that's what's gonna hold our crust. Then I just turn it over on itself halfway about. You can just pick it up, see how nice of crust it is? Go about halfway in, open it up, look at that gorgeous crust. Now the important thing, never stretch it into place. Let it fall down into place because then it's gonna actually not want to shrink as much. If you stretch a dough, it's gonna shrink. You don't want that. So you just kind of lift it and let it fall down in. Now, I like a nice, hefty, beautiful crimped crust, and I'm sure you do too. We all do. So what that means is I want to use a lot of this excess. So if anything, I just go through and check if I need to trim it all, just to make it even, going around, kind of checking if any of it needs to be. A lot of it though, I like having this excess. So I will keep at least 1 inch of excess because what we're gonna do, and I just kind of check it as I go. And I kind of just put my hand under to kind of guesstimate. I love the word guesstimate. I think we should use that in life all the time because let's be honest, everything's a guesstimation sometimes, but with knowledge in our mind. So then all this excess, see how it's sitting there? I roll it under. So pick it up and just roll it under and press it against that nice ridge or rim of that pie dish. And see how simple that is? And then we'll just crimp it. I love making a pie crust with you. I'm just going around now and crimping. Now, you can be fancy if you want to, but you know what? You don't have to be. I like to just do my simple crimp because it's what I know to do. And I'm just going through, I use my thumb, forefinger, and my knuckle on the other side to make a nice, hefty crimp. See how I just think, guys, if you home make a crust, everyone's just gonna say they love you. And then I do dock it with a fork. This is gonna help any air vents needed when it's baking so it doesn't puff up, even though we are gonna also put pyrates. And I go around the sides, do the same thing. Do you see how simple a crust can be? So for the pie weights, I take a piece of parchment, crumple it up. Feels good to do that. And then this just helps it lay nicer in the crust. And then you can just spread it out in here. Now, if you don't put pie weights in, the problem is it can slump, it can shrink. This is gonna help hold its sides. Now, if your crust, because maybe it will take you a little while to roll it out, maybe it's a new thing, you haven't done it. If the crust gets soft and it doesn't feel cold or it's not feeling like it's holding well, put it in the fridge or the freezer for a few minutes, just to make sure, because you wanna bake it hot, but you wanna start it cold with a cold crust. So I'm gonna put in all my weights. I like to fill it to the top to make sure it holds. Now, if you don't have weights, use dried beans and keep them to be your beans for pie weights. That's all you need to do. And now I'm just going around making sure everything looks beautiful, and it does. We're gonna pop this in the oven. We're gonna par bake it so we don't get that soggy bottom. While that is baking, I take the pie weights out halfway through and then let it finish drying out. But I'm gonna make the filling, which starts with a couple eggs. This is a really simple pumpkin pie filling, but it is the best pumpkin pie. So we're gonna put in a can of pumpkin puree. Do not buy the kind that has other stuff added to it. You want just pumpkin puree. We of course want some whole milk and a little bit of heavy cream. That mixture creates that beautiful creamy texture. It's so good. We need, of course, some sugar because this is a pie and it's really creating a custard filling is what pumpkin pie is. So put the sugar right in. We need a little bit of flour. This just helps hold it just enough so it has some texture. The The normal spices, of course, are some ground ginger, cinnamon, a little bit of cloves, and nutmeg. That's the beautiful cacophony we need, and a little bit of salt. And the fun part is just bringing it all together, because of course, this is what amazes me about any ingredients, any baking. It starts with what looks like a pile of what, and then you finish and you're like, that's what I wanted. So this is a gorgeous pumpkin pie, and the reason I don't like to use pumpkin pie spice, I like to make my own, is to me it gets just the right level of flavors you want, and you know they're all fresh then too. So mix it until it's smooth, no lumps of anything, and we're gonna pour it in. Like I said, partway through the par baking, I removed the pie weight so then the bottom could finish drying out, which if you can hear, it has a nice dryness to it. So what this does, some people love that kind of wet bottom on a pie. This is not having a soggy bottom. I think that way you have a nice flaky, well-baked crust underneath. So when you par bake and actually fully pre-bake the crust, which is what we did, that's what you're gonna get. And I think with a chocolate crust especially, it's good. So now we have our filling that we whisked up. I'm just one more time making sure everything was well mixed. I'm just gonna start pouring it right into this warm shell. I mean, look at the colors together if nothing else. How does that not just scream Thanksgiving and just absolute excitement for what you're about to eat? Now, there's always gonna be a little extra filling depending on your exact pie shell you're using. So just bake this up separately if you have any left. That's no problem at all. And now we just can put this back in the oven. It doesn't actually take that long to bake because you want a slightly jiggly center so you don't get that crack. And then we'll let it cool and we'll have pie. The pie has been out and I let it cool down fully because you cannot cut your pie or finish it before it's cooled down. That needs to set up in the middle. And I made sure to take it out when it was slightly jiggly. That's important. If you don't, it could overbake. And then it could curdle a little bit. You don't want that. So I melted a little bit of nice kind of bittersweet chocolate and let it cool just slightly because now I think to complement that chocolate crust, you just want a little bit of chocolate drizzled on it. And there is no perfect way to do this other than just going back and forth with some of those drizzles and then just getting some more. And I let a little fall off first, but you can see what this does is I think it dresses up the pie for one, but it also is what's gonna drive home that really good chocolate flavor. You can let that chocolate, set slightly, or you can just slice into it. So I am personally always kind of team pumpkin. I love a good pumpkin pie. I think there's nothing more right for the holidays than a good pumpkin pie. And then just go right in, and we have a well-baked crust. And do you know what that means? That means it should come out just beautifully. Oh, look at that, with that still creamy center. That's exactly what you want, because you can just tell, I pulled that chocolate on top a little bit, but you can tell how perfect it is. It's soft, it's not overbaked. And it is so good. It is just like a pure, beautiful melt in your mouth custard that is just set enough. I have chocolate on my finger. There's nothing wrong with that. And can I tell you how that crust with the chocolate complements that filling of the pumpkin and those warm spices so well. They go so well together. It's like they were made for each other. And you're gonna probably wonder after you make this, why don't you make this all the time? It's a good question. You may never go back to a traditional crust, or you might wanna do both. That's a great idea. That's what's fun about Thanksgiving. You can find things that are slightly different, but still hold on to those traditional nostalgic flavors that we want. That's exactly what this pie is. It is both nostalgic and it is slightly updated, but in a delicious twist that does not take anything away and gives you all the flavor you want. So share this video around because other people might be excited too. Check my website, wyseguide.com, where you can print off and check this recipe anytime you want and find everything else you need for your full Thanksgiving meal. Happy Thanksgiving, friends.